Why are you still in Mythic? You think you do everything right and that your randoms are just bad. But if that's the case, how do better players reach Masters while playing with randoms only every season? Well, don't worry, I know how, and I'm gonna teach you. It all comes down to these 3 main steps, and if you follow this video closely, you'll learn everything you need to carry your team and finally reach the rank you want. But promise me you'll stick to the end, because without the last step, everything else falls apart. Keep in mind that even if you're a better player than me, you should still watch the whole video. These steps are all tied together and I'm sure you'll get something out of it. So let's start with the most important skill you need to master for ranked and for Brawl Stars in general, and that is positioning. I've made 3 videos about it so far, but it still shocks me that people don't have a clue on how to position themselves on the map. And I also couldn't find a complete ranked guide on YouTube that mentions positioning the right way. So let's analyze it. Positioning is when you use the map structure and the opponent's matchups to gain an advantage and push up the map. It can be divided into 2 main categories: how to apply pressure to the enemy and how to deal with enemies when they're pressuring you. Applying pressure comes with these 4 simple tips. First, when the match starts, you need to pay close attention to the enemy's matchup. That way you can see which brawlers are better for you and which are not. So this is a list of all brawlers categories, and this is another list of all their best and worst matchups. So for example, if you're playing as a Mortis and you're facing against 2 tanks with high DPS and a thrower, you should focus on the thrower most of the time. If you don't, you're probably gonna die again and again. But it gets better, because the second tip is how to always have the easiest matchups possible. So the key here is lane switching. Most maps have 2 lanes and a mid, which means that each one of your teammates should take one of these positions. Also, to know which brawlers go where, I made this list as well, where all brawlers are categorized by their positions. But if you see that you have a harder matchup on one lane but an easier one on the other lane, you can coordinate with your teammate to switch lanes. That way, if you win against your new matchup, the enemies will have to back down. Keep in mind that if the enemy tries to switch lanes with you, you need to switch again to always have the easier matchup. But once you do that, the third tip is really important, and that is to use walls and bushes correctly. This is especially useful if the map is closed or if you're playing more aggressive brawlers. But you can do it with all brawlers in all types of maps. For example, you can peek behind walls to shoot while staying safe and waste the opponent's ammo at the same time, or stay inside bushes to push back the enemy because they won't know exactly where you're at. But this last tip is what ties everything together. When you have the pressure, you need to maintain it. And the easiest way to do that is by trying to take down one opponent so the enemy is constantly in a 2v3 situation. But to do that, you need your teammates to help you most of the time. So that's where pinching comes into play. It's simple. You just shoot an enemy from 2 different directions. This is really tough to deal with because the opponent can't actually hide and their only option is to try dodging everything at once. But you have to be careful with that because you don't want to be pinching opponents with really high HP. If you do, you might not be able to take them down, and once they heal up, the enemy will push you back because you wasted all of your shots. But what can you do if that actually happens? This is where the second category of positioning comes in. So let's see how to get out of pressure with these 3 simple tips. First, the easiest way to relieve the pressure is to take down an enemy. Even if you die when this happens, the enemy will have to travel a longer distance to get back to the fight when they respawn because they were pressuring you. So it's still a positive trade most of the time. Once you do that, the second tip is to play it safe. The enemies will anticipate that you will push them immediately just because you got the kill, so they will probably start shooting at you while they're backing down. The worst thing to do here is to get out in the open and die. This will not only give them time to group up when their teammate responds, but you'll also be dead. So instead of your opponents, your team will end up being in a 2v3 situation. But if you just take cover by staying inside bushes or behind walls until they waste all their shots, you should be good to go. Plus, if they're stupid, they won't back down and instead waste their shots on you trying to keep the pressure. In that case, given the fact that they are outnumbered, you can just pinch them again to get another kill. But it's not over yet. You need to be careful about this one thing that can change everything, and that is the enemy's abilities. Sometimes, even in a 1v3 situation, an enemy can push you back just because of their gadget, super or hypercharge. This often happens if the enemy's abilities are broken or just really good against your comp. So you have to be careful not to push an enemy when they have their abilities and you know you can't do anything about it. Instead, the best thing to do is to slowly try to get positioning on the map, but without exposing yourself to that brawler. If you know you can't do that, your only option is to wait for that brawler to use their abilities in order to push them back later. So try baiting them out or pinch them with your teammates to force them to use their abilities defensively. And that's pretty much the basics about positioning. But it gets even better, because all this won't help you enough in ranked unless you master master this next step, and that is drafting. And oh boy, is this a big one. So here we're gonna analyze how to pick and ban brawlers and how to effectively counter the enemy comp. But before that, hear me out. I know y'all are skipping the sponsored part of a video, but take a look at this. This is me casually playing in my room, and trust me, I already have a good Wi-Fi connection. But this is me when I'm using Exit Lag Mobile. Huge difference, right? Well, that's because Exit Lag uses over 1,000 servers around the world, finds the best one for you, and connects you there. And it's not just for Brawl Stars. You can play over 800 games, such as PUBG, Code Mobile, Free Fire, and Roblox, and still use it to find you the best servers. And the further you are from the servers, the better the results will be. So if you're in the US, for example, where there aren't many Brawl Stars servers, it's gonna work wonders. But now we're getting to the good stuff, because you can try it out for free by scanning this QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description. And when you like it, because I'm sure you will, you can use code GBAB at checkout to get 15% off. This is a limited time offer though, and it's only gonna be available until the end of July. So grab it and run while you can. But if you're watching this after it ends, it doesn't matter. Just check it out today and enjoy your lag-free games from now on. Now keep watching, because this is where it gets interesting. Drafting is what most players struggle with. You might have the practical skills to reach masters, but if your drafting skills suck, you will be stuck in legendary forever. So let's fix that. Drafting consists of 3 parts that are all tied together. If you miss even one of them, the other ones are not going to be that effective. So let's start with the meta. And no, I'm not going to cover the best brawlers in the game right now. That won't help you in the long run. And that's because the meta always depends on your skill level. For example, an Edgar main will thrive in Diamond, but won't be able to get past that. And that's because noobs don't know how to counter him, but better players actually laugh when they see their opponents first picking Edgar. But if you can't tell which brawlers are meta for your level, the best thing to do is to play more. If you seem to be winning with a specific brawler, or if the enemy picks them and destroy you, you should take some mental notes that this brawler is meta in your level. But meta brawlers also depend on the map and the mode. A C-tier brawler can actually be the best pick in a specific map just because the way it's structured. But don't worry, because we're gonna talk about the maps and the modes in a while. Now that you know the meta brawlers, it's time to analyze the drafting screen. So the second part of drafting is how to ban brawlers. Banning is really complicated, but I'm gonna try making it as simple as possible. First, let's talk about the coin toss. If the opponents have first pick, you should ban the meta brawlers for your level. If you don't, the opponents might pick them and destroy you. So don't say to yourself, oh, they're probably not gonna pick them, so I'm not gonna ban them so I can pick them afterwards. No, trust me, I've made that mistake in the past and it never works. Just keep it simple and ban them. But if you have first pick now, this means that the opponents can pick the last brawler. And last picks are super important. You can see the entire draft and pick a brawler that not only counters the enemy, but also synergizes well with your teammates' brawlers. These are usually tanks, assassins, or throwers, as they can be really toxic if the enemy doesn't have anything to counter them. So if the opponents have last pick, try banning brawlers of those 3 categories that are good in that specific map and mode. Also, if you're playing with randoms, or if you don't have any meta brawlers upgraded, you can still ban the meta brawlers even if you have first pick. That way, if your team doesn't pick them, the enemy can't pick them either. But here's where the magic happens. The third and most important part of drafting is how to pick brawlers. It might seem obvious, but trust me, it's not. So if you follow these 2 tips, you'll learn how to pick brawlers correctly, both to counter the enemy composition and synergize with your team to win the match. The first tip is to understand the general brawler categories and their matchups. So let's analyze these 2 lists that I gave you earlier. Brawlers can be divided into 7 main categories, and they all have their best and worst matchups. The problem is that a lot of brawlers can fit into 2 categories depending on the situation. For example, Kid can be used as an assassin when the enemies have low HP brawlers, but he can also become a thrower by jumping at the back of a teammate. But as you might have noticed, there are 8 categories here. And no, it's not a mistake. It's because all support brawlers belong to one of the main categories already. So now let's analyze every category. Tanks have a lot of HP but a really short range. They can be used to counter controllers, snipers, throwers, and assassins because these categories usually don't have a lot of DPS. But their worst matchups are anti-tanks and damage dealers, which do have a lot of DPS. Now you can also counter them by using wall breakers. But be careful, because a lot of them will get pressured back before they have the chance to fully break open the map. Assassins usually have a lot of mobility, which allows them to get a kill and then back down safely. They're also used to counter low DPS brawlers, so controllers, throwers, and snipers, but they get countered by anti-tanks and tanks this time because they don't have a lot of HP to compete with them. You can also use some of the damage dealers as well as some wall breakers. But again, be careful with those. Now anti-tanks have a lot of DPS, but their range is medium, so their best matchups are tanks and assassins, but they get countered by brawlers that can outrange them, such as controllers and snipers. Anti-tanks don't have any mobility, so they also get countered by throwers, which can be really toxic behind those walls. Now some damage dealers can counter them too if they outrange them, but wall breakers can also be used to break open the map for their longer range teammates to counter them. Now the difference between an anti-tank and a damage dealer is that the damage dealers are mostly used to deal a lot of damage on the heist safe or have a lot of DPS in general. Anti-tanks can deal with tanks and assassins because their HP is moderate, but the damage dealer's HP is not standard, so they might struggle with assassins. I wouldn't say that their best matchups matter a lot because you should use them in heist most of the time just to deal some safe damage, but they're mostly good against tanks and they struggle against controllers and some wall breakers. But controllers are fascinating. They all have one or more abilities that can help them control the map and the pace of the game easier. Their best matchups are anti-tanks and damage dealers because they don't have the same range to compete with them, but most of them don't have a lot of DPS, and that's why they get countered by assassins and tanks, which can pressure them a lot and get the kills. They also get countered by brawlers that can outrange them, so wall breakers in combination with snipers to break open the map, as well as throwers because they lack mobility to get close to them. And last, snipers and throwers are similar to each other. They both counter controllers, anti-tanks and damage dealers, and they also get countered by assassins and tanks. But the main difference is that snipers thrive on open maps and throwers in maps with a lot of walls. So it's really interesting because you can use them to counter each other depending on the map. So you can pick a wall breaker in combination with a sniper to break open the map and counter throwers, or a thrower to stay behind key walls of the map and counter snipers. But as you can tell, none of these matchups are 100% accurate. A lot of interactions depend on two things: the map and the mode. So the second tip of picking brawlers is to understand the different types of maps and modes and counter the enemy depending on them. Starting with the maps. Maps can be categorized by closed, bushy, tight or open. Closed maps have a lot of bushes and walls. The two most common categories you'll see here are tanks and anti-tanks, but you can also pick assassins sometimes or wall breakers in combination with high DPS brawlers to break open key walls and bushes and restrict tanks that depend on them. Now bushy maps have a lot of bushes but not that many walls. This is perfect for tanks and anti-tanks again, but you'll definitely get value out of a good controller too, just because the tanks don't have a lot of walls to hide behind. A wall breaker can also be good sometimes, but keep in mind that you mostly want to be using them to break walls rather than bushes. Tight maps are interesting. They don't have a lot of bushes, but they do have a lot of walls, and that's why throwers and assassins are usually the best picks here. But be careful. If you pick them too early in the draft, you might get countered by tanks or even wall breakers if the map doesn't have unbreakable walls. You can also use snipers in combination with those wall breakers, but only in more passive game modes. And speaking about snipers, their best category, as you might have guessed, is open maps. But apart from snipers, a lot of controllers can benefit in those types of maps, especially if the mode is not that passive. To counter them though, you can use throwers if the map has some key walls that they can benefit from, as well as tanks and assassins to pressure any low HP brawlers back. But you need to have mastered positioning and have a lot of skill in general if you want to use tanks and assassins in more open maps. Just to make it easier for you though, I made this list, so you can find a specific brawler you want to play and see what type of map suits them better. But now it's time for the modes. The one thing you need to understand here is the objective of each mode. So let's start with Brawl Ball. The main objective here is to score goals, so your brawlers have to have some mobility to make your life easier. So this is a list of the best mobility brawlers. In general, tanks and assassins are a good fit, but you don't want to draft them too early because they can get countered quite easily. You also need an anti-tank in most cases, either to counter the opponent's tanks or to prevent them from going in. But something really important that many players forget, especially in Brawl Ball, is drafting a strong mid brawler too. This is usually going to be another anti-tank or a controller, but one with good range. Now let's talk about gem grab. The main objective here is to collect gems, so you need a solid mid brawler that can do well against aggressive brawlers but also has a bit of range. These are referred to as gem carriers, and this is a list of the best of them. In general though, you also need an aggressive brawler who can apply pressure and try to take down the enemy gem carrier. These can be tanks, assassins or throwers depending on the map. But to cover everything, you also need a defender that can do well against those aggressive brawlers. Anti-tanks are the best for that, but depending on the matchups, these defenders can also be assassins or controllers. Moving on to bounty. The key here is kills and range, so the best category for that is snipers. You can draft them early, but be ready to counter them by using throwers or even assassins, especially if you have last pick. These are also a few brawlers that can naturally do well against both snipers and aggressive brawlers and can be picked earlier in the draft. If you're unsure unsure on how to counter the enemy comp, you can always check out those. Now, Knockout plays differently. The main objective is to get kills again. But here, as the gas closes in, it's crucial to have at least one brawler with high HP to survive the pressure. So assassins are much more viable here. So these are the three types of brawlers you need to have. You normally need a sniper earlier in the draft, then a thrower, and then you can pick an assassin or a tank for when the gas closes in. Of course, survivability is key here. So if the enemy goes an anti-tank, for example, make sure your last pick can handle that matchup. Next up is Hot Zone. The main objective here is to hold the zone. So your brawlers have to have one or more controlling abilities to stay in the zone for longer. And the best category for that is obviously controllers. So this is a list of the best zone brawlers. Just be careful not to pick too many of them because your comp will lack DPS. But apart from that, you also need a brawler that can apply pressure. Those are typically assassins, tanks, or even throwers in maps with a lot of walls. They can also be paired with support brawlers too that can give them various buffs to stay in the battle for longer. For example, Grey combined with a tank is a nearly unstoppable comp in a lot of hot zone maps. But unlike all other modes, Heist is super straightforward. And that's because the main objective here is safe damage. So the best category by far is damage dealer. And this is the list of the best of them. However, going for 3 damage dealers makes your draft easy to counter. And that's why you should also draft a brawler that can enable them to push up the map and destroy the safe. These brawlers are usually snipers, controllers, or even assassins and tanks, especially in closed maps. Just to make it easier for you though, I made this list as well. So you can again find a specific brawler you want to play and see what mode suits them better. We've covered the first 2 main steps to get better in ranked: positioning and drafting. But now it's time for the final step that ties everything together. If you ignore this, you will never reach your goals, both in game and in your real life. And that is your mentality. If pro players can watch their replays and identify their mistakes, what makes you think that you played perfectly? So instead of blaming everything on your bad randoms, what about blaming everything on you? What about watching your own replays and see what you could have done better? Trust me, the best thing to do in life is to blame yourself. And that's because if you do, you'll immediately search for ways to stop making the same mistake again. It might hurt. You might think you're trash at the game. You might think you don't even deserve to rise up the ranks. And sometimes all of it might actually be the truth. But that's just the start. Because now that you've correctly identified that you need to fix something, the next step is fixing it. If you don't ever see what's wrong with you and instead you blame your teammates every time, you won't fix shit. Ever. Yes, teammates matter. And yes, they suck sometimes. But even in those cases, you can still learn from your mistakes. So the next time your teammates suck, you can avoid making the same ones and maybe carry them to victory. And speaking of mistakes, the most common one that is ruining everyone's matches and their overall experience in the game is to get mad. Don't do that. Control your emotions. Always remember this one thing that GbabGaming told you. Guys, Brawl Stars is just a game. It doesn't matter if you lose. It doesn't matter if your teammates suck. You're here to have fun and enjoy the game. If you solely focus on the destination, you won't have fun and instead you'll be mad all the time. Trust me, I still struggle with this myself sometimes. And it's by far the worst thing you can do. It'll cost you matches, throw you off your game, and waste your time. So don't show your frustration. If you have any toxic pens equipped, just unequip them. Use happy pens even if you're losing. And even if you're not happy that you're losing, just by using those happy pens will help your subconscious mind to perceive that fake level of happiness. And over time, something that was once fake will become real. You won't care anymore. You will just blame yourself for your mistakes and avoid getting mad at things that are not in your control. This will not only change your entire perception of the game, but your entire life too. And the sooner you start doing it, the faster you'll level up in both. Now you know you need to subscribe if you made it this far. Oh, and also one of the things that makes me super mad and ruins my mentality every time is when my internet connection sucks. So don't forget to check out Exit Lag from the link in the description and use code GBAB for 15% off to always enjoy your games because of your low ping. But game sense and positioning go together, and there are a lot more things to it that I didn't cover in this video. So you can check out this one right here to improve your game sense super fast, and hopefully I'll see you there.